works. Ooh, big sword. Hello. More swords? Maybe. More swords? Hi. No, not that one. New sword, very fun. Hello. How do I get, all messages are visible. Yes, that's what I want. Hi. If anyone's got any questions about stuff, I figured I'd try popping on here on YouTube for a change. I see if that works any better. Also, you know, importantly, YouTube for the fact that I can have these on live instead of the synthetic, which I always have. Which is a nice change of pace, really. Because this feels so much better to use than the synthetic 11 sword I have. Also, I can hear it a lot better. I can hear my cuts, if they're good or not. So it's a much better teaching tool. That's always fun. Sure. Oh, well, last time I thought I was doing one, someone told me I didn't have enough spins in it. So I'm trying to figure out if... I don't know which spin I'm missing. Because they say there's one more spin to it than I was doing. But I don't know which spin I'm missing. I can do it with this one too, probably. This one might... I don't know if this one's going to be better or worse. I think I like that less, actually. On the back. I don't know where the other spin is. I mean, like if it's when it's behind the back. But I don't know where the rest of that spin comes from. Well, this is a VB. This one specifically the Purple Heart VB. So Purple Heart keeps these in stock to their specifications, which is a little bit different from the usual ones. So that's always fun. And then this is specifically a Meyer rapier. So you'll note it has no finger rings. Because Meyer, it doesn't finger the guard. He thumb grips. So your grip with this, you're going to be sitting and kind of playing with the thumb a little bit on it. More so than you would with another, you know, with another side sword, you'd be fingering the grip and then working that angle a lot. But Meyer's going to be pushing that thumb grip a little bit more. Yeah, I've been meaning to do some sword reviews. I've got all these swords now that I need to actually, like, be reviewing. Hey, you. I got foster puppies over there in the corner. Oh, hey. Yeah, I really like this. I didn't get to use it. I haven't used it much, but I like it well enough. So I actually have 3 different makers for these 3 different swords. I have my Regenier Montante, I have my Siggy fetter, and then my VB rapier. I wish it would stop doing that with the... Can I get the lightsaber? It's a bit light out for the lightsaber. Plus, I can do the lightsaber on TikTok. I can't do my steel swords on TikTok. So this is I'm taking advantage of the fact that I'm on here to do stuff I can't normally do. I really like long swords. I mean, I love all these other swords, don't get me wrong, but there's just something about putting two hands on a sword that you can totally use in one hand. I mean, this is not nearly as nimble as my side sword over there, or rapier, but you can still use it in one hand, no problem. Hello. Oh, hi, Mom. Someone ask for something else? The lightsaber? No. We have new foster puppies, Mom. That's fun. New foster pups. Isn't that right? Yeah. We're a new foster pup. Oh, I'm up to 10 people now. That's cool. My thoughts on the basket hilt. I've used the basket hilt like once. I didn't like it. So I'm used to, again, I'm mostly used to using this, right? Two foster puppies. So I'm used to this. I'm used to being able to move my hand wherever I darn well please, right? Like there's nothing getting in my way. I can change my grips. I can do whatever I want with this. The moment I started using a basket hilt, I felt like how trapped my hand was within the basket hilt. Oh, I couldn't stand it. It didn't feel right. I did not like using the basket hilt. For me, I think for me, the basket hilt, I felt like I couldn't get the outward movement in the hand that I wanted. Because when I take grips, I tend to favor a very kind of point forward handshake, which, I mean, yeah, handshakes, but like I like to get like out with my handshake to there or so, and I could not get this grip when I was in the basket hilt. I was crammed into doing something more fist shaped, and it felt really weird, and so that kind of turned me away from it. I'm sure if I had a different basket hilt, it might be different, but at least with the one I was using, I could not stand the way it crammed in on my hand. And there's the big sword. Oh, this thing feels so heavy now that I've been using the... It's always fun to like use one sword and then switch to another sword and then just be like, oh no, this feels heavy now. But then once I do this for a bit and I switch over to the long sword, it's going to feel like the lightest thing ever. If you've noticed, I like having red grips on my swords. Woo. This would be the biggest sword I have. It's very big. Oh, why does the chat always disappear on me? Yeah, I mean, I like the protection. I just don't like what it costs. I don't like what that protection costs me, and I don't think I necessarily like want that much protection. I mean, it's one of those things. Like, yeah, well, it's your hand, right? Like, if I were actually having to sword fight, I'd want protection. But even then, I don't know that I'd necessarily want that degree of protection, because I feel like that might actually be starting to push into the realm of overkill. Like, your hand's pretty much impervious inside that thing, but I don't know. I think you could get away with less and not really feel that same constraint. Oh, big sword. I haven't used this big sword enough. come on, give me a good sound. I've done a little bit of saber fencing. It's not really my speed. Like I was saying earlier, is I'm partial to the two-handed swords. So I mean, I've got this rapier here, but I definitely like having two hands on my sword, be it a long sword or longer sword. Oh man. I've never actually like compared these two together. Oh, Montante's not even in the screen. That's just how much more sword we're dealing with here. I wanted to do sport fencing. I meant to do it in college, but I never got around to it. Mostly because the fencing club, the university fencing club was closed by the time I got. Oh yeah, like I was saying, this feels so light now. But yeah, the university fencing club was defunct by the time I got there. I'm quite a fan of hanging out here and just kind of throwing the blade out. Not trying to cut with it necessarily, just taking that center line with a displacement. I really enjoy it because I'll hang out like here. I'll be kind of moving and in. Oh yeah, I've been thinking about doing some more. I've done some Elden Ring stuff, but Marcus Vance has another channel. We do pretty similar stuff, and he did a whole series on the Elden Ring weapons, and I didn't really want to come off as copycatting on that. I mostly focus on the armors. That's kind of been the unspoken thing between us, is that I focus on the armors, he focuses on the swords. Varehouses are good for turning the body. Which is good, because you want to be turning when you throw those. Because the more offline you get with that, the more likely you are to sneak around and hit them. Where did I buy most of the swords? Not from one place. I'm just sitting here thinking, I'm like, not a single one of these swords came from the same place as the other ones. So this is Siggy. This came straight from Siggy. I didn't go. So this is the Siggy one. This is my Regenier. The Regenier came from HEMA Supplies. They're the importer. Although Purple Heart Armory now imports as well. They're right across the street. And then this is from Purple Heart. But it's made by BB. Hey, yep, glad to be back. Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. It's quite the thing going on back there. I upload sparring videos when I get them. The only problem is that they can be kind of hard to record. Like I don't like asking somebody to be my cameraman, and it's hard to stay in frame. So what ends up happening is when I try to record sparring footage, I get maybe a good few exchanges on film, and then the rest is I'll demonstrate for you, right? So let's say I'm trying to record sparring footage, and we're sparring. Oh no, the fight is over here now, and this is all that you get to see. And it's like nobody wants to watch this. So that's the problem I have when I'm recording, is we inevitably wander off, and it's just such a pain to get good footage. So I usually just rely on tournament footage. Unfortunately, I don't think I got any from my last tournament, which is a shame, because that went really well. Well, mostly. In Longsword, I managed to place 6th of 67 fencers, I think. Yeah, 67 fencers, and I was I missed 5th by point 0.1 points. It was like a technicality kind of thing. Someone had like slight 0.1 advantage over me, so they got 5th and I got 6th. But you know whatever. We were basically doing Swiss pairing, cycling pools. So we didn't do an elimination bracket. We just did non-stop fighting. Basically, you would have basically 9 fights to score as well as you could, and then whoever had the best scores by the end of those 9 fights would be the winner bracket. So I missed 5th by like 0.1. Yeah, our club just doesn't really do much recording. I have an interest in other Swords Beyond. This is actually kind of a good 2-part because we have Man's Man and Harris Cole kind of asking the same thing here. I have a basic interest in Swords from Beyond, but my budgeting barely keeps up with European swords. So if I started collecting outside European, Swords Beyond European swords, I'd be broke. So I stick to what I know. Because there's plenty enough swords to go around for European alone. Oh yeah, it was a great tournament. Like I was telling you, I think I mentioned it to you. The rule set's totally different. Oh, good question. Dream sword. I would love to answer that. Give me 1 second. I gotta talk to my mama. She's in the. You all behave yourselves because my mama's here. Okay. All right. So the rule set at Raleigh Open was way faster. So for context here, the tournament I was at before Raleigh Open, it was Queen's Gambit, and Queen's Gambit was pushing a rule set, but they were trying to achieve a lot of like martial significance. So a good clean hit would be a win. That'd be it. And so it was an elimination bracket too. So after pools, 1 hit, or I guess it's 2 because it was double elimination, but 2 hits, you could be out of the tournament completely. Not even two matches, just 2 hits. And the idea there is that people wouldn't do. The hope was that people wouldn't do anything like reckless, or they'd fight very martially, focus on self-defense first, and work from there. But I think the problem that occurred was that getting a good clean hit was also lights out, and it meant that there was actually very little incentive to get out clean. I think that was the problem. So it had the reverse effect of actually making people more reckless, because they knew if all they had to do was basically they could sit in long point, and all they had to do was, I guess they'd be here, all they had to do was, and if they got a hit, nothing else mattered after that point. And that's just not. So I wasn't the biggest fan of that rule set. Then for Raleigh Open, our rule set was basically no points, really. Like there were points, but it was basically you would put the judges, and the judges would be watching the fencers. And the idea of the Raleigh Open was basically you have to convince the judges that you're better. So they were keeping their own internal tally. They never reported any of their winnings. They're keeping their own internal tally of how they think that fight's going. And so the onus is on you to fence impressively. So, if all you're doing there is just giving these little little boop, boop, and you're just tagging the hands over and over again, sure, you're getting hits in, but they're not impressed by that. And then, so it could, if one person's sitting there just going for these little hand hits the whole fight, and the other person is biding their time a little bit more, and they maybe set up some sort of boom, grapple, pull, disarm, and whatever, that's going to be weighted way more heavily, because the judges are going to be like, yeah, that was, really martially proficient and so forth. You demonstrated a greater skill. It wasn't entirely impartial in that sense, because there were still scoring metrics that they were keeping in their minds. So it doesn't. So even if you did pull off a really cool, impressive technique, if you got hit 10 times in the hands before you pulled that off, well, sorry, that was a cool technique, but you're not going to win. So it was that kind of thing. And rather than stopping and deliberating, because all the judges were running their own internal tallies, the fights were very fast. So they'd run the clock for 90 seconds. And the fight would be, you'd kind of, you'd do your approach, fight, whatever, boom, hit, withdraw. The judge would kind of be like, fighters, or the judge would call, as soon as the judge saw like a hit, they would go halt, they'd separate, fight, and then that's how fast it would be back in. So the whole reason why they were like stopping was so that the judges watching could have like a second to try to figure out what happened for themselves, and then keep things from getting messy. Because if you let people just kind of go at it for a while, it will pretty quickly devolve. But it just halt, separate, back in, and it was a very fast and continuous kind of style of fencing, which was really fun to be in and pretty fun to watch, I think. Yeah. Because the judges only have to report who they thought won. They don't have to report how many points. So, the basic system was like a hit was worth a point, doubles were worth nothing, and a display of excellent was worth 2 points. And the judges had clickers, and they were just keeping a internal tally of and if they didn't think that something was quality, they just ignored it. And so there was no moment where the judges had to like deliberate over an outcome. They're all just sitting there yeah, I like that, click. No, I didn't like that. Oh, that was really cool, click. And then at the very end of the fight, the director says, judges. And then all the judge does is just, they look at their tallies, what they came up with, and they say, this person won. And they never announce by how much or with any sort of advantage, just, they won. And what we found was majority rule, like, typically the judges are pretty much in consensus most of the time, or at the very least in a majority consensus. And when there wasn't a consensus, it was usually the two on one side and then the one on the other side opposing, because they have different views of the fight. My dad always said I should be a professor. Also, just flicking the point out, like, that's a fun little provocation. You'd be like, hey, you gonna do something? Yes, you are. Though you have to be careful not to do it too much, or else they, like, call your bluff, and they just hit you. So you have to be a little careful about how often you sit there. I need to do a video on, I've been meaning to do a video on breaking the rules. So, oh yeah, that's the other thing, quick and concise judgment. I think it also helps the honesty of the judges. The fact that they're not in any way seeing what the other judges are calling, or in any way having any influence on their calls, I think helps make them more honest with their own calls. Not to say that people are like deliberately dishonest, but that there is an inherent peer pressure when you are calling opposed to the other judges. And that can make you doubt yourself. If you say, I don't think that was a good hit, and the other two say that was a good hit, you might start doubting yourself on subsequent exchanges. Their calls are influencing you, whether or not you like, as much as you might want to like say you're ignoring it, like on a certain level you are internalizing that discrepancy for one way or the other. Maybe it's maybe it's vindicating. Maybe you feel like, well, now they're wrong and I'm right, or am I right? They might be right. And by completely removing that from the equation, I think it creates judges who are more honest to what they saw. Oh yeah, there is a two-handed saber. So the Swiss saber is probably what we're thinking of. And to fight with a Swiss saber, you fight with it like it's a longsword. I mean, it's a longsword. The only thing to bear in mind is that it's not. It's a curved sword, right? So you're not going to have sharp. You might have sharp, and then like sharp, but you're not going to have sharp. So that's the only thing to bear in mind, is that you're not going to be able to like throw like you're not going to be able to like zver deep down the blade. You could throw cuts with the back edge a little bit, so you could do a little flick. You could flick it a little bit. I mean, you can Zver with the tip, right? You can do a little pop through, but you're not going to be doing any like meaty cutting with the back edge. Yeah, I think that's probably a fair way to go with it. Kriegsmesser functionally is a. I mean, honestly, like katanas are two-handed. Say like swords overlap in a lot of ways. Kriegsmesser, katana, Swiss saber. These are all kind of in the same ballpark of each other, and they're going to have some interesting similarities. Now, the Swiss saber is going to stand out from the pack because it has really developed hand protection. So for anybody wondering, like, picture in your mind's eye with me, like a full-on like swept hilt rapier. Think of something like that, right? So like this beautiful rapier guard. Now take it and stretch it. Stretch that guard down so that you can get two hands behind it. Then take that rapier blade off and stick on a saber blade, and that's your Swiss saber. It is a like terrifying piece of work. Curved Montante win. So there are some Kriegsmessers that get really, really big, and I have kind of wanted to like, I've been amusing myself with the notion of like, what if you had a Montante-sized messer, and I think that would just be the most fantastic thing. Someone was asking about also, or way earlier, someone was asking about like what is my dream sword, and we're very close to actually hitting it. So I would love a Swiss saber, but that's not my dream sword. My dream sword is still a long sword, but it's a long sword pretty much with the Swiss saber treatment. So it'd be a complex hilted longsword. But unlike the Swiss saber, I'm not looking for one that is totally enclosing, but I'm not looking for one that only covers the lead hand. It's a weird, it's kind of hard to describe. So it does this cool, because I don't like how the really elongated two-handed basket hilt kind of looks. I don't like how it looks. So what this specific kind of sword does is it hides its pommel. So it's a hand and a half sword, not like a full long sword. So it's a much shorter grip than this. So picture a grip that is like long enough for this, and then you can get like that. And so that's the kind of space you have on this thing. And then the pommel, you're actually like on the pommel with the second hand. So what they do is they have a really long pommel. Well, actually, it's probably about like this, honestly. So that so the second hand's grip is like half pommel, or half the pommel and half grip. And then the rest of the sword is being, oh yeah, I guess I could hold it this way. So you'd have a grip like this, essentially, under it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're in the Walls collection. They're like 16th century South German long, hand and a half swords or whatever. Basket hilts. Scala Gladiatore has covered them before. But I actually have one, I'm commissioning one. I'm really excited. So the whole idea with these, and they're also made to be fingering the guard. So that's kind of where you get a little bit extra hand space. So I don't know that they'd have enough room. Oh, actually, you know what? This should probably get me close enough to the idea. So, if we're talking about that, if we think about how much space my hand takes up on this, like this, if I finger the guard, I free up more space. So the idea of this particular kind of sword is that they know you're going to be putting a finger over the guard, and then they give you just enough room to get a second hand on it. More than this, because I'm like way off of it, but you get the idea here. And so you're basically capitalizing on the guard it looks like a one-handed sword with a weirdly long pommel, basically. And so when you grip it through there, and then you have just enough space to get that second hand on, you're not completely covered by the guard, because it's a guard built for one hand, but you are still getting a degree of passive coverage for your lower hand. And so you can sit there and use it in two hands if you want, or you can use it in one hand. Yeah, so that's the only concern. So I think it would kind of get in the way. The thing there is that it doesn't wrap around on the outside of the hand at all. It only wraps on the, or it wraps on the outside of the hand. It does not wrap on the inside of the hand. So best I can figure is if I want to do that kind of stuff, the pommel does stick out beyond the guard. So you're probably going to have to be, if you want to do thumb grip stuff on it, you would have to be like holding it at the pommel. But I do not believe thumb grips, using it with a thumb grip was actually ever part of the intention, because they have thumb bars. So you've probably heard about finger rings, but thumb bars are a little bit different. So it's basically the like evolution there. So when I'm holding it like this, you see my fingers over the top. Well, there we go. But you see my thumb's just kind of hanging out here. So what a thumb bar is a bar right here. And you can grip that bar with your thumb, and you can kind of hook your thumb into it. It's like a little loop. And you put your thumb through that loop, and then you can hold down on it. So you have grip on your finger and on your thumb. And between those two, you can basically hold the entire sword with that alone. And you can be pushing and pulling and manipulating on those bars. And so every single example of the kind of longsword I'm looking for, they all have that thumb bar. So I don't think thumb grips were actually intended for them at all. I think the idea there is you have a nice one-handed sword, and if you need it, you can, cleave through somebody with a two-handed grip. I don't think you were necessarily expected to like fight two-handed primarily. I think they were primarily one-handed swords that you were then able to power a cut with if you wanted to. Big sword. I love this thing. Fun fact, if you ever want to carry one of these comfortably, this is kind of the way to do it. Because it takes like no energy from me to do this. Anywhere else, like if you want to do it like this, you can, but then I don't know, it's like this isn't so bad, but this still feels like it takes more energy to do. And then you also want to be, you got the parrying hooks there that you kind of want to be mindful of, and you can't really like get up on it any more than that. So hooking it over, because then you can hook that guard over your back, and it just kind of sits there. Like so all it takes to keep it from tipping over is I just lay my hand on it, and it just kind of sits there, and it takes very little energy from me. Yeah, exactly. Like with some Polish and Hungarian sabers. Oh, that's a good question. Do great swords come with a scabbard? Yes and no. It depends. Some of them do, some of them don't. Usually, all the depictions I've seen of big two-handed swords with scabbards, they do not have the parrying lugs. So that seems to be the general distinction between them. I've never seen a depiction of a historical scabbard for one of these where the sword has these. But I have seen swords of this size without these hooks, and they do have scabbards. So I think that just tends to be the factor there is like, do you want your parrying hooks or not? I mean, it's kind of weird to design a scabbard around around these pieces. I guess you could scabbard the blade itself, because none of this is sharp. So you could just scabbard the blade, but then it's just kind of weird. But there's a really cool picture of a couple swordsmen hanging out, and they all, like, it's like a squad of two-handed swordsmen, and they're all just kind of hanging outside a city, and they all have these beautiful, like, red grips and red scabbards, and they're just standing around, like, just, like, casually leaning on their giant swords, just hanging out, just shooting the breeze outside a city. It's a really cool picture. What's the purpose of the hooks? Oh, man, I love that. I don't know how to demonstrate that. I will figure out a way to do that. Wonder how they survive being exposed without one. Because you would kind of, like these are, they can be personal weapons, but very often they're going to be, part of the equipment. So depending on what you're looking at, soldiers on the march, they're just gonna be marching with them, and you clean, keep it oiled, clean it off. If it gets wet, wipe it down or whatever. But they're just gonna be marching around with these, and then they're gonna be stowing them in camp or whatever. or they're gonna, and if they're not, with the soldier, and if they're not, out on campaign, then they're in an armory somewhere. And that's where most of our stocks of these today, surviving stocks of these things is from armories, because giant sword is kind of an expensive proposition, so it tends to be something that like the well-to-dos like order for whatever, like order for their city or order for whatever. I mean, not to say that you can't personally own one of them, but a lot of our surviving examples come from these armories, city armories. I don't know if I would say tends to. Again, it's that kind of distinction of the ones I've seen that have scabbards don't have hooks, and the ones that have hooks, or you know what I mean. Hooks or no hooks. The only mentions I have ever read of scabbards come from Montante text, specifically complaining about scabbards, actually, and it's actually pretty much the only reference I've found over Europeans having back scabbards, which is like crazy. But the best part is that the back scabbard thing, he complains about them for the reasons that we complain about them, because if you're wearing this thing on a back scabbard, you're not going to draw this. So his complaint is that he says something to the effect of people wearing them scabbarded on their back or whatever, as is becoming the custom, are like may as well not have the sword at all, because by the time they can actually like take the scabbard off, or take it off their back, pull off the scabbard, and then be ready with the sword, like whoop-de-doo, you've already gotten stabbed and left in the alley. So what he says is if you want to carry one of these around town for self-defense, he says to just don't even bother with the scabbard. He says to carry it like this. He says, put it in your left hand, lay it on your shoulder, and just go about your business with the big sword. That's his advice. Godino says that. He says, just don't take the scabbard. Just leave that at home, and just if you're going out with the big sword, just carry the big sword. Just deal with it. So the parrying hooks. So the parrying hooks, so these are the parrying lugs, parrying hooks, whatever you want to call them. I mean, these ones are technically lugs because they're not hooks. Sometimes they're hooks, sometimes they're lugs. I use the term interchangeably, I don't really care. But these are technically lugs. And what lugs do is they're basically a secondary crossguard. So you have this crossguard, you have this crossguard. So what people tend to think when they hear the crossguard is they figure, oh, well, it's so that you can choke up on it, because the point of balance on the sword is like here. So by holding it here, this makes it very like blady. But the moment I hold it here, it is no longer blady. It is now like really quite nimble because my hand is at the center of balance. So if I take a grip like this and this, I can go and have a very nimble little spear. And so that's what people tend to jump to when they think about this. And like, yeah, totally, because when we see manuals telling you to do literally this. But there's more to it than that. Because the other thing a crossguard does is it changes. It basically it's the stop, right? It's the point at It's the point at which the blade stops. So it creates an angle so between the blade and between the cross, you have an angle. The shilts work the exact same way. Shilts buy you a little extra hand protection. So the words. So you see how close it is to hitting my hand like this. The moment it gets caught further out, suddenly, despite the same angle, I'm much safer. And that goes doubly for when it's all the way out here. So it allows me to have a much more shallow bind while still protecting my face. Let me see how I can. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. So, this works. Okay. So here, I'm super dead. I've been stabbed. I've been impaled. I'm still dead, but you can see the difference. Very dead. Actually safe, yeah. There, safe, safe, dead. Safe, dead. So it works like that. So you can basically force binds to happen further out away from your face if you're so inclined. But you can also just twist the sword and like let it slide in deeper. So it's kind of yours to play with as you see fit. You can either let them catch there, or you can do a twist and let them slide through if you want to get them deeper for some reason. Maybe you want leverage on them because they're further out from you, so you can't resist them as well as you can down there. But you have such a big sword and such a big handle that you can kind of manhandle them a little bit. Oh yeah. Yeah, so if you've got a big old greatsword, you probably also have a sidearm. I actually have a picture on my table over there of a greatsword person. They're standing like this, and you can see the scabbard. They're wearing a cat's vulgar, and they're wearing it across their waist, so you can see the scabbard just kind of shooting off to the side in that picture. Oh, no, darn it. This chat is always disappearing way too fast. Do I have any recommendations for getting into HEMA or where to start if you want defense with a longsword? My #1 recommendation is to go to the HEMA Alliance website, HEMA Alliance, and then on the website they have what it's called the Club Finder. And it's basically like a Google map with every single club that's affiliated with the HEMA Alliance is on that map. So you just put in your zip code, it'll show you the nearest clubs to you. Ideally, there will be a club close enough to you. There might be a club near you that isn't part of the HEMA Alliance, but I would strongly recommend preferring to go to a HEMA Alliance club because it is basically the closest thing we have to an international governing body for this and clubs. And there's like HEMA Alliance insurance, and it's a lot of technical, bureaucratic stuff that just means that club is going to be in a better position, I think, for your safety. They have instructor certification and that kind of stuff. What is the worst injury I've ever gotten? I broke my finger, and it doesn't go all the way no more. So that's all I got now. Oh, you can actually see another injury. A busted finger. But yeah, I can't bend this all the way anymore. It stops. That's very unfortunate for me. I don't notice it very often because, how often do you need to, get past that point? I don't notice it. Although it does make it hard to hold change sometimes. If I, have, loose change in my hand, sometimes it'll just fall through the hole because I can't actually, close that finger up enough to kind of lock it in. So it just kind of falls out the bottom. That took a while when I was taking pills to learn. I now have to pinch it with the. So yeah, I would get some pills in my hand. I'd move my hand, and the pills would just all fall out the bottom of my hand. It was frustrating for a while, but I got used to it. Someone was asking about the VB. Yes, VB. VB Meyer rapier on the thumbnail. What do I think of it? Just bought one recently. Yes. It's not only in the thumbnail, it's right here. I like to use the thumbnail to take pictures of whatever I'm handling. This is my VB right here. I like it. I don't do a lot of rapier and stuff. I bought this because I had a tournament, and so the last sword and buckler tournament I went to, they allowed the messer because that's what I had. I had a messer, so they let me use the messer. The next tournament I went to, did the sword and buckler. It was side sword and buckler. They didn't allow messers, so I was like, oh no, I have to buy a side sword. So this one, I bought this. The main reason why I bought this is because it is a Meyer rapier, and the Meyer rapier is not. You can see how much the handle's sticking out the bottom. It's not designed for this. It's designed for this, which was good because I don't have fingered gloves. I have mittens, so I needed, on short notice, I needed a sword that qualified as a side sword that I could put my sparring glove mittens in. So I settled on this, and honestly, I like it. The only reason, so wouldn't normally like impulse buy a sword like that, but I did because I'd actually been researching this sword previously as a potential purchase. I decided against it at the time, but I had already checked it out and everything, and I was actually totally okay with getting one. So that's the only reason why I kind of like jumped at buying it, because I'd already done the legwork on it. I never buy swords like on impulse. So this one I talked to a lot of people about it. I really like it. I don't do a lot of side swords, so I don't have an opinion on it relative to other side swords. And also the fact that, you know, you're not fingering the guard dramatically changes what it feels like to use this thing. I mean, you could. I mean, sure. But ultimately, I think a side sword that you're fingering the guard of is going to inherently feel a little more responsive, I think, in that essence. But I do like, because I do mostly dramatic fencing, I do a lot of thumb stuff. And so I find that I will naturally kind of use that messer muscle memory when I'm just handling this thing. So I like it in that respect, because I will often kind of wind leading with my thumb, or doing, you know, basically using my thumb to steer a lot. And so I like that about this. You know, from that perspective, I find that it handles well in that kind of intention. You know, I can cut with it nicely. I can pop it forward and then start guiding the tip with the thumb a little bit, or winding against and stuff. The pet peeve I have is it is a hex nut held on pommel, and I find, so it tightens, yeah, it tightens this way. So I find that as I'm manipulating the sword, I actually kind of like gradually loosen the pommel, like with my own hand. I gradually loosen it up, and so over time I just find that the pommel just kind of gets really loose. When did I start doing HEMA? I've been doing HEMA for like 8 years. 8 years now? Over 8 years. 8 in a piece. Side swords in general, I think they're really cool. I really like them. It's something I've been meaning to do more of, just because I find that side sword fencing, like single side sword, is the most beautiful fencing. I love longsword fencing. Don't get me wrong. Longsword fencing is my favorite, but longsword fencing is like, it's very direct, and it's so snappy, because you know you got two hands on the thing, right? Like the side with a longsword, you know, you basically got the whole, what is in essence a more or less vaguely one-handed-ish, maybe not quite one-handed, but it's closer to being a one-handed sword than it is being a two-handed sword, I think, in most cases, especially compared to like a Montante, right? So you have this sword that is, you know, marginally heavier than the one-handed sword, and you have two hands on it, and I find that the longsword fencing has to be a lot of, you know, boom, boom. It's just, it's so fast, and like, the best way I've ever heard it described is staccato. It doesn't always flow. It doesn't tend to like have much of a like whoosh, whoosh kind of flow. It's, you know, the fact that you can start and stop these cuts on dime, it's a lot of like boom, boom, pop, 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 pop kind of stuff. And it just, I love it, and it's very fun, but it doesn't have the same gravitas of, you know, being, you know, of that kind of like working out sort of outward cuts. Oh, that's one thing I do find is, at least in my hand, I do find that this kind of like big old pommel here, I kind of lose the sword sometimes. There's something about it where there's like I think the pommel, I think as I'm manipulating the sword, the pommel tends to kind of like catch on the outside of my palm, like to here, and I'll lose because you know, you want it tucked in, and I will lose that fit as I'm moving the sword around, and I will end up in these positions where I'm basically bonking my palm onto the pommel, and I kind of lose alignment there for a minute until I can recover it. That's one thing I've noticed with this. But yeah, watching two people with side swords going at it, just single side swords, it's really pretty. because they tend to do these. I think it's just a fact, especially a factor of when as soon as they put the finger on the grip, or when they start fingering the guard, it just lends itself to this sort of this really pretty kind of way of fencing. And it's because you are using a one-hand sword, it's not going to be as snappy as like a longsword. So I think the fights tend to go a bit longer too, because you have to kind of set up your wind a little bit more, I think, with side swords. Just because it's when you're fencing out here, I think it's all a little. I say little, very, very little. And this is just my opinion. I think it's a bit easier for people to kind of react to the one hand on the sword. It kind of does. You don't have the second hand there to like yank and make the sword do things that it wouldn't normally do. You're wedded to the flow of the sword a little bit more than you do with a long sword. Because there's no reason, like I can flow with a long sword, but there's no need to flow with a long sword. With this, you kind of need to a bit more, much in the same way with the Montante. The Montante is in a weight class where, once again, its heft like overtakes your ability to like really bully it around in a way. Like the longsword will do whatever you ask it to do. You can cheat all day with a longsword and it does not complain. You try to do that same kind of like cheating with something like this or something like the Montante, and they don't play so nice like that. And I mean, yes, you can totally, start and stop, and you can throw cuts there or whatever. But I find just in general, that kind of relevant. I think that's a relevant distinction in how they handle, and you are more set on using that. And also the fact that you only have the one hand means that when you do some sort of beat or displacement, it's going to take them longer to recover and displace them more. I think if you can deliver a beat that sets them aside and they've only got the one hand and their sword's still pretty long, if you can deliver that beat to their weak and bonk, it's going to take them longer to recover that sword than if you did the same thing to a longsword person. Somebody with a longsword who's going to be like, okay, now what? They're just going to immediately apply their leverage with their backhand and pull that. If you go boom, right? Because it's if this is the pivot point, and you go whah, this pops out. See, wham, that's out. That doesn't happen so much when you have a longsword, because you immediately have something to stop that from happening. The sword is between the two hands. You can, if it starts going one way, you can push or pull on the other way, and you can do this, leverage action to recover control of the sword if somebody starts to beat it. You don't have that second hand to be a lever with this. If that gets slapped, I only have the one hand to recover it. And sure, I can. What happens is that leverage still kind of applies, but you're levering like between the upper half or the lower half of your hand. So if this gets slapped, I'm squeezing with my pinky to pull it back. Same as if I'm throwing a cut. I'm relaxing my hand right before I take the cut, and then I'm squeezing to snap it, and then I'm gripping it fully through. I've set that grip as the cut's coming through, but it's using that same kind of leverage there, but you have way less of it with a one-handed sword because you only have the pinky and I guess like the ring finger to pull that back when it's been bonked away, as opposed to having an entire other hand to pull it back. What are my opinions on sides? Okay, so I talk about so side swords. Just in conclusion, side swords fence beautifully. I think the factors of them being one-handed swords of fairly considerable length and importantly being cut and thrust swords means that you have just a really pretty fencing. They're right up there with like saber fencing. Saber fencing, in much the same way, is also very beautiful. I just think that I favor the side sword for the beauty of the fencing because the fact that they are as point friendly as they are, they're kind of they're sort of the proto, if we want to go with that, proto / contemporary to the rapier as we tend to think of it. You basically get like both in equal measure. You get the nice beautiful cutting, and they have the back edge, so you also have the all those cool like reverse edge beats, and then you also have the fascinating like point work that you get. Which, not to say that sabers don't thrust, but I figure anybody who's done fencing can kind of vibe with me on that one. I think I got the point across more enough. Let me know if you disagree with that. I haven't done a lot of saber fencing. I've done some. It's a little different. It's still very beautiful, but I think side sword's still more beautiful. Black Fencer synthetic Meyer rapier feels more responsive than my clubmate's Black Fencer synthetic side sword. That's possible. I mean, if they're different swords, I mean, it's entirely possible that it feels more responsive. That's just comes down to the manufacturer, right? Like you can mess with the configuration all you want, but there's a lot that goes into the handling of a sword, more than just the overall form factor. I don't know what I meant by dramatic fencing at this point. That was a while ago. Have I done much fencing with shields beside bucklers? No, I haven't. It's pretty much just bucklers for me. I have fenced against shields. That was not fun. I was super, super, super bruised at the end of that. We had who is now an instructor for us, someone who practices HEMA, so historical African martial arts, and he came to sparring night one day with all of his practice weapons, which was very fun. So I got to play around with like a shotel. That was really cool. But he did basically what their equivalent to an arming sword would be, and he did that with a rawhide shield of like this height. And let me tell you, trying to get around a rawhide shield of this height and like this width with one of these, not easy. It's not easy. Oh man, I could not get through. So it basically ended up being, because the usual game plan when somebody's got a shield is feint high, go low, go feint low, go high. It doesn't work when their shield is as tall as they are. You feint high, they block high, they're still covered low. How do you get around that? So basically, the only way I ever got hits in on him were by drawing out either his sword arm and getting his sword arm to come out ahead of his shield. I could maybe get a hit on that, or I could go and start working his sword arm side to try to get his shield moved. And if I could get his shield moved, I could then usually open up his thigh, and I could shoot in for the thigh really fast. And those are like the two shots. I had two shots on him. I could either take his sword arm or I could take his shield side thigh. That was it. Oh wait, I think he was left-handed too. So I think we both ended up. So yeah, actually, I think I was getting his sword side thigh. So by the end of that, both of our thighs were just these swollen lumps, because those were the only spots we could hit each other. It was just thigh shot, and he'd go thigh shot, and I'd go thigh shot. It was bad, awful. It was so bad. Oh, Have I done much fencing with the shield beside bucklers? Would I say that the longsword has the advantage in a duel with a side sword because of the added snappiness? I felt that, as well as you can change the momentum of the... So, that's a fun one. So, the game That's always an interesting game, and I think they're fairly evenly matched, honestly. And then it starts to tip in their favor the moment they start getting to use a second thing. So if they get to fight you with a side sword and like a buckler or a dagger or anything like that, the game shifts into their ballpark. Like it's their game to lose at that point. When it's a single side sword versus a long sword, it's a very interesting matchup because you have they have more reach than you. Just they're going to have more reach than you because yes, this is a shorter sword, but look at how much shorter it is. Not really. Like what? Like that's a centimeter or two, so it's marginally shorter. But they're fighting with one hand, and you're fighting with two. So one of those things that I think people don't necessarily realize at first is that a longsword, despite being long, that extra length is also partially. It's not just free length. You are tethered to that. Yes, you can disengage and get more length, but you are in standard method of operation. You are tethered to that length, and while there are tricks to maximize your reach, slipping, shooting for that pommel thrust, that's an option, or going for a geisel, and then you can milk the full length of the sword. Under normal handling operations, your reach is limited by the fact that your second arm has to be on it, and that prevents you from opening up the shoulders. So my effective reach, I have a greater effective reach with the side sword, even though it is a smaller sword, because I'm using that side sword out here. And if you want to play that game with the long sword, then you're just playing into the side sword's hands, because now you have a slower, heavier sword than they have, and they're going to like dance around you. Because yes, you totally use this in one hand, but like me swinging that around is just when they can just sit here and be like, okay, like, what do you want to do about that? Sure, they'll play into it. So in my experiences with mixing the two, if the longsword can actually like get in, great. But it's a very hard proposition for the longsword to get past like this, because they don't have the longsword beat in the bind. The longsword's going to beat in the bind. Longsword's going to dominate pretty much any other like man's portable whatever like conventional sidearmy sword. Like, you have two hands on it. It's big. It's heavier than pretty much all the other swords it's me going up against. It's going to dominate every single bind it gets into. But all those lighter swords don't want to bind with you. Binding is one of those things that you kind of have to like consent to. It requires the agreement of both parties, because you can always just pull away from the bind, or you can disengage or do whatever you want. You don't have to play the bind if you don't want to. So the longsword person is going to be sitting there like, bind with me. I want to bind against you. I either want to like engage with a bind, or I want to cut in and force you into a bind. And if they get to that point, the person with the side sword is going to be compelled to like disengage and cut the legs or do whatever they can to get away from that bind situation. And then also the legs, big thing there. Because you're not tethered to the arm anymore, leg shots are a lot easier to make with this. If you want to get those leg shots, I mean, you're already tethered, but now you're going low. My maximum reach here, you can see the little white tip on the sword. You can see my reach there, like without compromising structure. That's about as best I can go, but I can be off screen. So I'm on screen with two hands. It's out there somewhere. I can get the leg from out there. And then all it takes to like really eke out even more is you just kind of do a little squat. And yeah, leg shots for days with one of these. You don't have that with the longsword unless you start doing those geisels. But again, that's kind of playing into their ballpark, right? You're trying, like, if you try to beat the side sword at being a one-handed sword, you're just gonna lose. Like, why even? So, better to play into your what makes a longsword good and try to like overtake than than just pretend that you have a side sword, I guess. And then of course all that goes out the window the moment somebody walks in with one of these. And then it doesn't matter if you have a longsword or a side sword. This guy wins. Yeah, I'm going back up to the chat. Reading covert. Yeah, bear in mind there's still plenty of false edge cutting with. Yeah, totally. I'm just. There are always like, it's so hard to talk about. Like, generalizations are so risky. You know. Yeah, it's just one of those things. But yeah, not to say that you don't ever have false edge cuts with sabers or anything. Just rolling back to that side sword point of just you've got the full length of the side sword sharp on both ends kind of thing. The whole yeah, I'll get it. Pittsburgh. Still wondering if I would be interested in being a guest instructor at our event. Fun fact at Pittsburgh. Yeah. I saw. I meant to get. I completely forgot what video. I think that video got taken down that you commented on. I think I lost that video because I think you were talking on one of these on a Montante video, and I don't. I practice some Montante, but I don't feel qualified to teach about Montante. I like to teach I'll teach about Montantes, right? Like to a general audience, but I don't feel qualified to give a HEMA class for HEMA people on the Montante. I don't think I know it well enough to do it any justice in that like kind of context. Now, I mean, I'm happy to instruct on longswords, like German longsword. I got you. What the darn bugs? My bug spray is wearing off. Yeah, I would be totally happy to teach longsword, and also if I have to fly to Pittsburgh, I don't want to take the Montante anyways. This is much easier to pack in a bag somewhere than that thing. Oh man, that checked luggage fee would be like crazy. But yeah, hit me up on like my Instagram. I have it linked somewhere. That's the best way to get in touch with me presently. Is just hit my follow through to my Instagram and then message me there, and then I'll keep an eye out for it. Would be interested. I got to figure out if it would work, and then just things to figure out. Great shield and great shield. Let's go. Oh my gosh, that'd be fascinating. I mean, I think honestly, I mean, you pretty much only have the thrust. Like, I feel pretty confident in my ability to like aggressively thrust with this thing in one hand. Cutting with it is, I could get a cut. Like I could cut like once. And to cut with this thing in one hand, it takes like it's a full body action to. And I have to avoid like checking myself in the chest with the grip. I have to watch out for that pommel coming like right in towards my chest. But yeah, I feel like I could, like, if I had a shield and I had to use this in one hand, I feel like I could, especially having a really big shield, I feel like I could decently work that, especially if I choke up on it. Nah, I don't like that actually. Maybe if I finger the guard. Ooh, that's not bad. Yeah. So that's it. If I have a great shield, I have to do it with a big old sword like this. I'm gonna finger the guard. I'm gonna just sit there and see what kind of thrusts I can get out and capitalize on the reach. Let's see, what else do we have? Yeah, 5 foot shield. It was absolutely crazy. I hope people. I'm so far behind on the chat. Going as long as same material agree that seeing high sword actually has a spawn. Summer's been pretty good. Oh, am fighting in a pike and shot era battle. Would I rather have a halberd as Vihander or a rotella and side sword? I'm gonna go with the halberd actually. I think I'm gonna go with the halberd. Rotella guys did not stick around. They kept trying to like work with the rotellas. They kept like it sounds like a good plan, you know, like if you need to like get in on a bunch of pointy things, like giving a guy like a nice shield and then give him his his side sword of whatever, and be like, all right, here you go, like go bruising on in there. It seems reasonable. You know, he's got some armor, he's got his rotella. Like, yeah, I could, you armor them up so they can tank their way and wade fighting their way into the pike formation. Like, it sounds good on paper. But they're very much a like Spanish oddity, and halberds are like universal. Like, everybody was using halberds in their armies, you know, and then the halberd persisted beyond. Halberd was still getting used after this wasn't being used, and after the Rodeleros were being used. So halberds were still kicking around. So yeah, I think I'm gonna go with the halberd because I think just that's the metric I always kind of use for like picking things. It's just the duration of use indicates to me, above all other things, a persistence of usefulness, and halberds persisted, and especially in a pike formation. Like, yes, like the Montante really comes into its own, or like the greatsword, like, you know, this is a really great thing for fighting off multiple people at once and stuff, but the time for this to shine is like with skirmishers, or like if battle lines start to break down a little bit, or there's a retreat or something and you need to like clear space. I think under the normal order of battle, you know, if you're in a formation with a bunch of people, you're pretty much restricted to fighting in these kind of boom, kind of thrusty, cutty, whatever ways, because you have people on all sides of you. And I think a halberd just lends itself to that style of fighting better than this. But not to say that these don't still absolutely serve a purpose in the order of battle. I think they have a very valuable function, and they are treated as being basically interchangeable with one another from a logistical standpoint. So, I mean, clearly they do each other's jobs well. I just think the bulk of usefulness in the context of being in a pike formation, moment to moment, would probably be with the halberd. Of course, if I am just assuming the role of somebody with one of these, I might actually, maybe I will take the Montante, because there's a very real chance I'm just going to be like in the office, like I'm just hanging out with the officers, and I'm just guarding the standard or something. So there's a very real chance that I just don't actually see any of the fighting. I just stand in the formation and let all the people up front do the fighting with the pikes. Of course, if things go downhill fast, then I'm in for it. But if things go downhill fast and I was a halberdier further up the ranks, I'd probably already be toast. So by the time this guy gets involved, I might have already died. So, you know, whatever. What are my thoughts on Elden Ring's heavy thrusting swords in terms of how they would realistically work? The god. Oh man, I'm so excited. Okay, I'm gonna get back to this because I'm gonna be distracted by that for a while. Oh, no, I am definitely not an expert. No, maybe I might be underselling myself a little bit, but I refuse to accept that I am not accepting any notion that I am not an expert. No, especially not with the Montante. Like, maybe I'll let you push that with the I don't even think I'm not an expert with the longsword, but like Montante, no, I'm not an expert with the Montante. I can teach this. I can fight with this. I do well with this. I'm totally happy to talk shop with this. Lesson on that thing, it would have to be like super bare bones. I mean, I don't even have the forms memorized. I have to go by the book. I cannot do them from memory. Sword steps and sword spears. I mean, yeah. I mean, you basically get to the point of it. Yeah, that's the trade-off when you're doing any polearm. The bigger the polearm head, you get perks, but it comes at the cost of mobility and stuff, right? You know, a really itsy bitsy teeny weeny little spearhead is still going to stab everything really great and it's going to be really fast, but you're not going to cut with it. And then the more blade you stick on it, you get more cut. And I think there's a sweet spot to be had. I think swords. I think once again, we can look at the numbers, right? How many true like sword staffs do you see? Like ever? Like they're around and they turn up, but like they're a minority for sure. You know, I think the sweet spot for a polearm head is once again we're back to the halberd. Something of like that. I think that's just the sweet spot. Consistently, throughout time, you see kind of the same general size polearm head cropping up and up and up and up. You know, you get your Dane axe, then you get like bardishes, halberds, billhooks, partisans. Some partisans get like completely. Some of the partisans I've seen do get into like sword staff territory. So partisans kind of push the envelope a little bit, but like glaives, you know, all of these things are kind of occupying the same general size. And I think the population density of how many of those things are throughout history, I think that's your sweet spot. And anything to either end of that is going to be pushing into a specialization that comes at costs. But I think that's your Goldilocks zone. Sure thing. Yeah, just catch me on Insta. Yeah. Don't pay to stand next to the guy with the flag. Sounds like a solid plan. Yep, that's my game plan. So yeah, I'm changing my. I'm gonna be, but then again, a halberdier can still do that job. So I think my money's still on the halberd. I don't remember who it is, but there's at least one fencing master who he basically gives his opinion on matchups, and he gives advantage to in a one-on-one. He gives advantage to the halberd over the Montante. He says it's not. He doesn't. He says it is not a lost fight, but it is one he does not advise. So if somebody's coming up on you with a halberd and you have a Montante, his advice is to like just break off. You know, like defend yourself, get out. He does not think you have good odds. You could win. I mean, you could win with a dagger. I mean, sure, and Montante is certainly not totally outclassed or anything like that. But he's like, yeah, if you come up against a halberd and you have a Montante, the best play is disengage. You do not have advantage. Pull out. Having a butt spike, yeah, you can totally have counterweights as butt spikes. Butt spikes aren't always just spikes. Sometimes they actually are counterweights. The Greeks used counterweights on their spears that were also pointy enough that if you broke your spear, you could flip it around and use the other end. But the counterweights, because when you have a nice big counterweight on it, you can really you can hang further back and you can get more length out of your spear without compromising your reach and stuff. I'm losing my light. I'm gonna have to go in soon. I'm gonna wrap things up. So I'm gonna wrap things up here. Back to the original, the thing I wanted to talk about, because I've actually been playing Elden Ring. I was playing Elden Ring before I came out here, truth be told, and I was using a heavy thrusting sword when I came out here, or before I came out here. Oh, I can answer. I'm gonna answer this other one real quick. If your opponent was wearing armor head to toe, what weapon would be the most useful in that situation? I mean, the ones that they were packing, right? So they'd be like a poleaxe, some sort of sidearm sword, probably like an XVA type. So that's basically going to be a really robust. It's basically a diamond spike in the form of a sword. So that's the kind of long sword a lot of them would be packing. So you start off with your poleaxe, and if you broke your poleaxe, or it decayed, like the range decayed or something, or you wanted to try something, you could go to your sword and fight with that. And then the last thing would be your Rondelle Dagger, which again is basically a big fancy spike. You know, is the common trend between all three of those weapons is that they all use big spikes. They're all big into spikes. Spikes are your things with spikes and things that can smash. That's your best bet. So the heavy thrusting swords are going to be the last thing I get to. They are ridiculous, and I love them. I think they'd be bothersome to use, but I think they'd be good cavalry swords. I think they're much like trying to use this in one hand. I think they're too much sword to like fence with. I mean, look at the Great Epee. The Great Epee is I think it's bigger than this. I think the Great Epee is like this big, and it's a huge sword. And I just don't think you'd like be able to fence well with it. But there are I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. The concierge or something like that that's a real sword that like is that. It doesn't look like the epee. It looks kind of like it has more like a saber guard to it, like a simple like knuckle bow. But it is a sword of like that height. It is like up to your schnoz, and its function isn't to be a sword. It's to be a lance. It is a sword made to be a lance. So in the context of cavalry use, I think they're actually. I think the great thrusting swords from Elden Ring would be fine. Just use them on Torrent. Mount up on Torrent and then use them, and yeah, you're gonna be doing it right. Just riding around with your really big lance for sword and just kind of off you go. So I think that's pretty much the sum of the light. I am like disappearing into the void here. So I'm gonna call it here. Thank you all for joining me. I hope you learned some stuff. My light is totally gone. I haven't had dinner yet either. And it's been like an hour and a half. Yeah. Thank you.